Hey, this is Anand. Welcome to another edition of the 1500 plus SAT Masterclass. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about connecting independent clauses. So this is one of the most important topics in the grammar section of the SAT, and it comes under the boundaries and transitions domain. All right. So this pattern is so important that there is always going to be 2 or 3 questions, if not more, across both Module 1 and Module 2 of the SAT. So if you know how to answer them, it's an easy 30 to 50 points. All right. So I'm going to be teaching you a specific set of rules and a framework for answering these questions. Okay. And after that, we're going to solve a number of questions where we'll employ what we learned, and then we'll see how to answer all of those questions. And these questions are representative of all the different ways in which the SAT would test your understanding of the concept behind this pattern. All right. Now, before we start, this video is part of a series of videos on SAT grammar. So I have provided a link to the playlist in the description so you can go and watch all the videos in sequence. Then practice. Practice is what is going to get you those high scores. Okay. So you can go to Just Logged In and practice this pattern and pretty much every pattern on the SAT, as well as take as many tests as you want. All right. So I provided a link to Just Logged In the description as well. All right. So let's get started. So what is an independent clause? Okay. So if you have a group of words, whether it's a phrase or a clause, if you can actually put a full stop at the end of it and it becomes a legal sentence, then it is an independent clause. Okay. Not only that, it also needs to express a thought completely. Okay. Let's take an example. Something simple. Jack goes to school. Okay. This is a group of words, 4 words. Jack goes to school. And then after school, I put a period or a full stop. And that becomes a legal sentence. It has a subject, it has a verb, and it expresses a complete thought. All right. Now let me do something. Let me take just the first 2 words, right? Jack goes. Okay. And I put a full stop. Then it is still a valid sentence. Okay. It's just 2 words, but then it has a subject, it has a verb, it expresses a complete thought. Well, you're still left with that intrigue that, okay, Jack goes where, but that sentence is still a complete thought, right? So he goes somewhere. Okay. So Jack goes. So that's legal. Now, if I say Jack goes to and then put a full stop after to, then it is not a legal sentence because you have to finish it. It's incomplete. Okay. So you have something hanging out there, right? You've left it hanging. So you have to complete the sentence, right? So that's not an independent clause. All right. So let's take some examples. Okay. The dog barked. Okay. So that's an independent clause. If you remove the full stop, that is, we put a full stop and made it a full legal sentence. Take this one. The committee, after months of debate, approved the budget. Yeah. So that's an independent clause. We put a full stop, made it a legal sentence. It's a long one and it's a legal sentence. Okay. Not independent. In the morning. Yeah. It's just a phrase. Okay. You need something to complete the sentence. Okay. Running down the street. Again, it's not independent. Because the rain finally stopped. That is also not independent because you started that with because, you have to finish it with a reason. Okay. So legally, it's not a full sentence. All right. Let's try a question. Table salt dissolves readily in dash. The polar water molecules surround and separate the ions. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Okay. If you want to take a moment and try and answer this question, do that. Just pause this video and think through the question. Okay. But before I start, I want to talk about why this question is about connecting independent clauses. Okay. If you look at these 4 answer choices, if I eliminate the punctuations and the conjunction here, okay, all the choices have the same word, which is water. Okay. I'm just going to take this water and then pour it here. All right. Okay. So now I'm left with two clauses here, which is table salt dissolves readily in water. That's the first one. The second one is the polar water molecules surround and separate the ions. Okay. So is this clause an independent clause? Table salt dissolves readily in water. Well, I could actually put a full stop after water and just walk away from it because it's a fully legal sentence, right? Similarly, this one, the polar water molecules surround and separate the ions, that is a full legal sentence as well. Therefore, that is an independent clause also. So we have two independent clauses, and the question is asking you how you connect these two independent clauses. Okay? Now guess the answer. So the correct answer is C, a semicolon. Okay? How did we come up with this answer? We're going to discuss this in the rest of the video because there are a few rules governing how you can legally connect two independent clauses. All right, before we move forward, if you like this video, hit the like button and also subscribe to our channel. We are adding a lot of content that covers every concept that is tested on the SAT, and we are also going to solve a lot of questions, okay, that cover all the different ways in which these concepts are tested. All right. Okay. So when you encounter a question about connecting independent clauses, the term that you should remember is SPACY. Okay. So SPACY is a mnemonic. S stands for semicolon, P stands for period or a full stop, A stands for and followed by a comma, and is a placeholder for all the conjunctions like and. We are going to talk about what those conjunctions are in just a moment. So for now, don't worry too much. So A stands for and, C stands for colon, and Y stands for an M dash. Okay, it's yet another way to represent a colon, or M dash can replace the colon. Okay, in a situation where a colon is used. All right. So that's SPACY. So remember this mnemonic. Okay. Now we are going to go one by one and see how to use each of these rules. Okay. Semicolon. Semicolon is to connect two related sentences. Okay. So there's no connecting word. You're not going to use a conjunction or anything. You're going to use semicolon like you would use a full stop. Okay. So the experiment succeeded. The results were published immediately. Okay. So these two are independent clauses. The experiment succeeded is an independent clause. The results were published immediately is an independent clause. And you put a semicolon after the first one. Okay. And when you start the second one, you don't use an uppercase T. Okay. It's still a lowercase t. Only in the case of a full stop would you use an uppercase T. All right. So that's the subtle difference between a semicolon and a full stop in terms of usage. Okay. Similarly, the storm knocked out power. Thousands of homes went dark. She trained for years. The gold medal was her reward. Now, if you notice, I could have used a full stop instead of a semicolon in all of these sentences. And you could do that and they're perfectly legal. Okay. So that is the usage of a period, right? To separate two complete sentences. Okay. So these two independent clauses, you are actually presenting them as two independent sentences by putting a full stop after the first one. Okay. And the semicolon and full stop are grammatically equivalent. All right. So having said that, there are two things. Number one, on the SAT, you will never get two options where the only difference between the two options is in the semicolon or a full stop, and one of those options is the right answer. Okay? Since these two are grammatically equivalent, there cannot be a case where one is right and the other is wrong. And on the SAT, you can have only one correct answer for a question, right? So therefore, if you get a question where there are two options in which one has a semicolon and the other has a period, and that's the only difference between the two options, you can safely eliminate both of those options because there cannot be a case where one is true and the other one is not. Okay? Now, the second takeaway is, it's a question rather, and that is, hey, if the semicolon and period are grammatically equivalent, then what is the difference? When should I use a semicolon and when should I use a period? So the answer to this question is not relevant for the SAT. However, it is very important for your college essay or the essays that you write or anything that you might write in future. Okay. So you would use a semicolon to connect two related thoughts, and you want the reader to read both the sentences in one breath as one connected thought. Okay, so that is when you would use a semicolon. Okay, so it's about the feel. All right, so for example here, she trained for years, the gold medal was her reward. See how I read in one breath. Okay, she trained for years, the gold medal was a reward. Okay, so you are explicitly asking the reader to make that connection. That is, hey, the gold medal was the reward for her intense training. Okay, so we emphasize that connection, and by using that semicolon. Now over here, you could read this as, she trained for years, the gold medal was a reward. So these are two independent thoughts. They stand next to each other, but then they are two independent thoughts. The reader can draw any inference they want. Okay, you are not pointing them, or you are not asking them to connect these two ideas and then say that, hey, it was the training that was that led to the gold medal. Okay, even though, well, it's obvious, right? We have to look at the context of the whole passage where these two sentences sit. But here, by putting a semicolon, we make that very obvious, and we don't leave it to the reader's guesswork. All right. Okay, so the next one, in SPACY, C stands for a comma. A. A stands for and plus comma. Okay. So when I said and, I said it's not just and, but it's also a set of conjunctions related to and. Okay, so we call them FANBOYS conjunctions. Okay, so remember this. It's a very popular mnemonic. Okay, in grammar. So FANBOY stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay, so remember this. So the rule is, you have these two independent clauses. Okay, so after the first independent clause, you put a comma, and then you add a FANBOYS conjunction, and then you add the next sentence. Okay, so between the conjunction and the second clause, there is no punctuation. There is no comma or a semicolon or whatever, right? So there's no punctuation. Okay, and each of these conjunctions, they are used for a specific purpose, and we're gonna talk about it. Okay. Again, don't use a FANBOYS conjunction without a comma before it. Okay, so it's always the first independent clause followed by a comma followed by the FANBOYS conjunction. Okay, examples. For, she left early, for she had an exam at dawn. So there are two independent clauses, right? She left early is an independent clause. She had an exam at dawn was the second clause. So we connect these two clauses by a comma followed by a FANBOYS conjunction, which is a for. Okay, so for is used for cause, right? So why did she leave early? Because she had an exam. Okay, so this is used to indicate the cause. Okay, so this is the effect and this is the cause. Okay, and is used for addition, right? So joining two concepts, okay, related concepts generally. So the experiment succeeded, that was one clause. The results were published, that is the second independent clause. So we put a comma followed by an and. Okay, so the experiment succeeded and the results were published. Nor is an added negative. Okay, so essentially this, you have to read this a bit differently here. Okay, he didn't call is the first clause, independent clause. The second independent clause is he didn't reply to text. Okay, so essentially he did not do two things. It's not he did two things, he did not do two things. What did he not do? He did not call and he did not reply to text. Therefore, when you join these two thoughts together, we say he did not call nor did he reply to text. Okay, so that's the use of nor. Okay, if you were to do this as two positives, then you would say he called and he replied to text, right? So that will be this usage. Okay, so this is two positives. This is specifically for connecting two negatives. Okay, the next is but. The plan looked simple, first class. The cost kept rising. So comma but. Okay, the plan looked simple, but the cost kept rising. So when would you use but? To indicate a contrast. Okay, the plan was very simple. Okay, but the costs kept rising. Okay, something that was not obvious, but hey, it happened, so you draw a contrast. Or is a choice. We can leave now, or we can wait for the next train. So two independent clauses: we can wait for the next train, we can leave now, and or is the conjunction. Yet is also a contrast, but it's a different kind of contrast. The route was long, or the route was long, depending on how you pronounce route. Yet no one complained. Yet means, but still. The route was long, but still no one complained. The food was expensive, yet we enjoyed it, whatever. Okay, so it is a contrast, but it's a different contrast from but. Okay, but is, hey, it's a very clear contrast. Okay, maybe I have to put it that way. Yet is a contrast which is equivalent to, yeah, that was true, but still we did this. Okay, so that's yet. So is a result. Okay, the road was flooded, so the race was postponed. So that's also a cause and effect. Okay, so in the case of so and in the case of for, right? For and so are cause and effect relationships, but there is a difference. In the case of for, the result comes first and the cause comes after, whereas in the case of so, the cause comes first and the result comes after. Okay, subtle difference, but depending on how you want to express something and how you want to emphasize, whether you want to emphasize the cause or the result, you can use one of these two forms. Okay, so quick use: but and yet, contrast; for and so is cause and effect; and nor, addition, positives, negatives; or is a choice. Okay, so this is the use of a FANBOYS. These are FANBOYS conjunctions at work. So just to recap, the way you use it is after the first independent clause, put a comma and then the FANBOYS conjunction, then no punctuation, the second independent clause. All right. So now let's look at C and Y in SPACY. Okay, so C stands for colon. For some reason, the use of colon is something that many students find confusing. Actually, it is not. Okay. So the reason you would use a colon between two independent clauses is this. Okay, the first clause essentially makes a statement, a declaration. Okay, it probably expresses an opinion. Okay, and then the second clause substantiates it. Okay, take an example. The experiment yielded a clear outcome. Okay, so that's a statement you made. And then the new compound reduced corrosion by 40%. Substantiates it, right? So it explains what the outcome was and why it was a clear outcome. The clarity comes from the fact that we have proof it reduced corrosion by 40%. All right. The verdict was unanimous. Every juror agreed she was innocent. Okay. So we explain both the aspects here. One is what the verdict was, that she was innocent was the verdict, and it was unanimous. Every juror agreed she was innocent, right? So you would use something like this when you want to say, hey, all you guys blamed her, for doing this, but the verdict was unanimous. Every juror agreed she was innocent. Okay, so you create that the drama here. The recipe needs one rare ingredient, so you create that hype. Okay, and you create that the intrigue, right? So what is that ingredient? Saffron grown only in Kashmir. Okay, so that's the rare ingredient that we are talking about. Okay, so in all of these sentences, okay, you could replace the colon with an M dash. And when you put an M dash, the reason you would use an M dash is to provide an additional emphasis. Okay, so especially when these sentences sit in a paragraph of text, when you put an M dash there, then the reader naturally sees a place to pause and they would go read it. Okay, so it attracts the attention of the reader, and there you make this big declaration and also you substantiate it. Okay, so let's take examples. I'm sorry. The experiment succeeded. The results were published immediately, and you put an M dash here. She finally saw the summit. Every aching step had been worth it. The budget passed. Not a single member objected. All right. So all these are good examples of the M dash. The first one I would argue that it's not a great example of the M dash. The reason being it's not as dramatic as the other ones, right? Well, the experiment succeeded and you published the results, sure. All right. But sure, you could use an M dash or you could use a colon. Okay. Okay. So let's take everything that we've learned, all the rules, and then let's apply to a real case, a very simple case. All right. So consider this. Jack's school was 3 miles away. He walked to school. All right. So two independent clauses. Jack's school was 3 miles away. That's an independent clause. You can put a full stop after away and you can walk away. All right. And it's going to be a full sentence. Similarly, he walked to school, full stop. All right. And that would be a complete sentence as well. All right. So let's apply SPACY and see how we could join these sentences. Okay. So take this one. I'm going to remove this and let's do semicolon. Of course, we are going to put a full stop. All right. So this is valid. Jack's school was 3 miles away. Semicolon. He walked to school. And these are like the first clause talks about his school and how far his school was. And then the second part says that he actually walked to school. And these are ideas that are connected. And therefore, semicolon is not only grammatically correct, but it is also semantically valid. Semantics means meaning in the given context. Okay. So it's valid that way also. All right. Now, we could also say, we could put a full stop. So when we put a full stop, we have to capitalize this. With a semicolon, you don't have to, whereas with a full stop, you have to. All right. So Jack's school was 3 miles away. He walked to school. Okay. So that's also valid. Now, let's look at the FANBOYS conjunction. All right. So Jack's school was 3 miles away, comma, let's try with and. Jack's school was 3 miles away and he walked to school. Sounds okay. So see how I'm using the conjunction. So after the first clause, you put a comma and then you put and after and there is no punctuation. The second clause just goes there right away. Okay, sits right next to the conjunction. So Jack's school was 3 miles away and he walked to school. Well, it's a nice statement to make. However, I can also change this and then say, yet he walked to school. Nothing else. I've just changed the conjunction. Okay. Now the meaning of this is a little different, right? Jack's school was 3 miles away, yet he walked to school, meaning, hey, the school was so far, yet he chose to walk. Right? But still he walked to school. He didn't bicycle, or maybe he didn't take a school bus, or, if he's a high school student, probably, so he probably didn't drive his car. as well if he already had a license, okay, or his dad didn't drop him to school. So we are saying it was 3 miles away, it's quite far, yet he walked to school. All right. So no matter what conjunction you use, any of the FANBOYS conjunctions, this is how you write it. Okay. So you put a comma followed by the conjunction. All right. Okay. Now let's try the colon. All right. So let's replace this with a colon. Is this correct? Not quite, right? So what did we say about the colon? The colon needs to make a statement, and then the second part needs to substantiate that statement or a claim or whatever it is that the first statement was stating. All right. So here, the first part is stating Jack's school was 3 miles away. All right. It didn't leave any question. It didn't make any claim or whatever. It just stated a fact. And then it said he walked to school. Well, this doesn't do anything to this particular statement, right? In fact, this one didn't make any claim or it didn't state anything non-obvious that had to be substantiated by the second part. And the second part certainly doesn't do any substantiation, okay? So the colon is not a good option to connect these two sentences. But I'll give you we can do this differently where we could use a colon. All right. So take this sentence, right? Jack's school was 3 miles away, yet he walked to school. So the question is, why did he walk to school? Well, maybe he was very fond of walking, right? So we could say Jack loved to walk. Okay. That is a statement. That is a claim. Okay. Now we can substantiate. His school was 3 miles away and he walked to school every day. He walked to school every day. Okay. Now, this is actually a nice use case for a colon. Okay. Jack loved to walk. That was his statement. And then this substantiates. His school was 3 miles away and he walked to school every day. If you notice, here is another connection of independent clauses. His school was 3 miles away is a valid independent clause. He walked to school every day is also a valid independent clause. And then we joined it with the FANBOYS conjunction and a comma. All right. So in fact, these are two examples in the same sentence, right? So we could do that. And what we could also do is, because we have colon, you could also use an M dash. It's an M dash. All right. Jack loved to walk. His school was 3 miles away and he walked to school every day. All right. So this is how we use all of the SPACY rules to connect two independent clauses. All right. So I hope these things came together and made sense. All right. Going forward in this video, we're going to look at real questions and we'll work them and see how we can use this knowledge to solve a variety of questions. All right. Like I said before, if you like this video, press like and also subscribe to our channel. All right. All right. So now let's apply this to a question. All right. So in 2018, okay, if you want, you can pause this video and read this sentence. Okay. In 2018, the cooperative doubled its membership across 3 dash, and then launched a profit-sharing plan that returned dividends to farm workers. Okay, and the question asks, fill this blank with whatever conforms to standard English conventions. Okay. Now let's look at the first thing you do when you see a question like this is look at all the 4 options. Okay. If you remove the punctuation, okay, so here we have dot, let's remove this, and also remove the conjunction, then pretty much all of the options have the same words, which is counties and it. Okay, so let's go and write. You can say, in 2018, the cooperative doubled its membership across 3 counties. So we can draw a line here. Then it launched a profit sharing plan that returned dividends to farm workers. Now both these classes, right, are independent classes. Okay, so in 2018, the corporator doubled its membership across the 3 counties. Full stop. It makes a valid sentence. Similarly, it launched a profit sharing plan that returned dividends to farm workers. That is also an independent clause. It forms a valid sentence. All right. So now the question is, what do we do between these two classes? Between these two words, right? So that's really the choice. So now you can apply the SPACY rule. Okay. So now the thing is, let's go look at, let me erase all this. Let me just write SPACY here. Okay. So now if you see, I have counties, full stop, and then it. This is actually valid. All right. This is the period rule. It's correct. Now if you look at this one, it just puts a comma between the two independent clauses. This is not valid. Okay. According to the SPACY rule. All right. You can have a comma and a FANBOYS conjunction, or you could have a semicolon, in which case it's going to substitute the period with a semicolon, but a comma is not valid. In fact, this kind of a sentence is called a comma splice. Okay, a comma splice is not valid. All right, and then in this case, it just puts both of them together without any punctuation in between, and when you actually read the whole sentence, it would make no sense. And this is known as a run-on. Okay, this is a run-on. Option D. Here it uses a FANBOYS conjunction, but then the FANBOYS conjunction should be used with a comma, and therefore D is not valid. All right, so A is the right answer. The algorithm here is your 5 steps. What is a five-step routine? So you identify the blank, you read before the blank, and you read after the blank, and check whether they form complete sentences. So before you read before the blank and after the blank, check the options. Okay. So the first thing you do is, remove all the punctuations and conjunctions from all the options and see if all words are the same in all the 4 options. Okay. Then put those words back into the sentence, just like we did in that example. Then you read before and after the blank and see whether they make complete sentences with the words that you copied over from the options. Okay. So if both form complete sentences, then you know they are both independent clauses, and therefore the SPACY rules apply. All right. Then go to all the options. There will be only one option that employs the SPACY rule correctly, and you would eliminate all the other options. So that is what you do. So that's the algorithm that you religiously follow, right? And you would always get your answer correctly. All right. So this is the method that we are going to follow to solve a number of questions. Okay. So now before we move ahead, there is another rule that we need to know. I separated this out because it's a little bit different from the SPACY rule, and I promise this will be the last rule that you will learn for independent classes. And trust me on this, connecting independent classes, if you're able to do this right, if you're able to practice enough, okay, and you can go to Just Locked In and practice this, and I'll tell you how. If you get this right, then this is an easy 30 to 40 points potentially, or maybe even 50 points on the real test. You are certainly going to get 2 or 3 questions, or maybe even more, I don't know, between module 1 and module 2. All right. So this is very easy. It's very algorithmic in the way that you approach these questions, and therefore there's a very high probability, or there's a very good chance that you will get everything correct. All right. So it's worth your time and investment on this, okay, in terms of effort. All right. So what is the other topic that I wanted to talk about? Okay. So let's go back to this. All right. I'm going to remove these. I'm going to take this thing here. Let's take this example. All right. Now, there is another interesting construct that you can make here, okay, with these two. Instead of comma yet, I can actually say semicolon, however. All right. Jack's school was 3 miles away, semicolon. However, he walked to school, maybe we can even say every day. However, he walked to school every day. This word, however, is called a conjunctive adverb. All right. So you could also legally join two independent clauses with a conjunctive adverb. All right. So let's go back to this presentation where I have a few examples. All right. So look at this example. Clinical trials show the antiviral reduces viral load within days. Okay. Therefore, you can actually put, if you remove all the punctuations, you are left with just therefore. So you can put therefore here. So therefore, physicians expect shorter infectious periods. Okay. So the way you use a conjunctive adverb here is you put a semicolon after the first one, then the conjunctive adverb followed by a comma. All right. So this is the only, I'm sorry. So this is the only option that's correct. Okay. So the rule is you end the first with a semicolon, then the conjunctive adverb followed by a comma, and then physicians expect shorter infectious periods. So, however, is not the only conjunctive adverb. There are other such words as well. Like, for example, you could say, in this case, Jack's school was 3 miles away. You could actually say, nonetheless, he walked to school every day. Okay, it means but still, but it's a slightly fancy way of saying but still. Okay, or yet. It's the same meaning. It's just a different way of saying the same thing. So nonetheless is also a conjunctive adverb. Okay, so Jack's school was 3 miles away, semicolon. Nonetheless, he walked to school every day. All right. What type of conjunctive adverbs would you use, right? Contrast is however, like you're stating A, however, B. So however, nevertheless, nonetheless, instead, on the other hand, conversely, rather, right? So these are all, common conjunctive adverbs, right? That are used to denote contrast. So similarly, cause and result, right? This example, therefore, which we saw just earlier, therefore, thus, hence, consequently, accordingly, as a result. Okay. Like, for example, you could say, Jack walked to school every day. As a result, he maintained a healthy weight or whatever. All right. So addition, moreover, furthermore, additionally, in addition, besides, also, likewise, all these are conjunctive adverbs. So for all of these usages, right, when you have two independent clauses, when you put one of these words, the way you work that is you put a semicolon followed by the word, one of these words, and a comma. Then your the next clause, right? Example or emphasis, right? For example, for instance, indeed, in fact, namely, of course, okay? And then time, right? Things like subsequently, meanwhile, then, okay? So things like that. So this SPACY and the conjunctive adverb rule, these things together, it's all the rules that you need to know, to join two independent clauses. All right, at least for the SAT. Okay, so we are not doing a full-fledged independent grammar course here. So we are very narrowly focused on the SAT, and this covers what you need to know to be able to join independent classes. All right. Now we'll jump straight to exercises, and we'll work a few examples that cover all of these different scenarios, both easy questions, hard questions, and questions of medium difficulty. All right. So now that we know how to connect independent classes, it's time to practice. Okay, so we're going to work a few questions of varying difficulty levels and different types of questions, so you have a good sense of what to expect on the SAT. Okay, so before we get there, you can watch all these videos and watch me solve questions, and you could read books. But here's the thing, all of that is not going to improve your score. The way that you raise your score and the way you get conversant with all of these concepts is by practicing it. Okay, so the practice is the prime mantra for getting better at anything. All right, so the best way to practice all these concepts is go to justloggedin.com. Okay, and everything is organized based on how we do things in this video. So go to justloggedin.com. There's pattern strategies. Just go to reading and writing and standard English conventions and connecting independent classes. So you have a full lesson here. Everything that we discuss in this video is in here. Okay, and a lot of different examples. And then you click the practice this pattern button, and you'll get ample questions here. So in fact, we have about 300 plus questions on just connecting independent classes. Okay, so you'll get ample practice from here. All right, so the other thing you can do is go to build skills and go to standard English conventions, boundaries. Okay, so the boundaries is a bigger topic, which connecting independent classes is one of the patterns within boundaries, right? So you can go to boundaries, and when you do that, you have a couple of options. So one is you can practice question by question. This is exactly what you got when you went via the pattern strategies that I just showed you, right? So you could do question by question. The same thing, just go choose whichever pattern that you're interested in. If you're interested in connecting independent classes, just go click on this and you will be able to practice. All right. So the other thing you could also do is go click on boundaries, and you could actually start a timed practice test. So you could do a 10 question test or a 20 question test. You could do mixed difficulty or a hard only test. Okay. So you can create on-demand tests on a specific topic. Okay, so this is it's pretty nice and useful, and this is how you practice and improve your score. Okay, all right, so let's go to solving our problems. Few problems here in connecting independent classes. So I have bookmarked a few questions, so you could do that too. So whenever you're practicing on Just Logged In, or even when you're taking a test or reviewing a test question, you could go click on the bookmark button, and then you could go review your bookmark questions anytime in future, right? Say you want to brush things up a week before the actual exam, you could go there and you can review, and everything is going to be neatly organized like this. All right. So let's go to boundaries and we'll get started. Okay, let's look at this question. So before we read the question, just do a quick scan of all the answer options. If I eliminate all the conjunctions and punctuations, I'm left with just range. There is this range that will deal with that later. But this looks like this might be a question about connecting independent classes. All right, so let's go and take a look at this question. So professional photographers long favored chemical film for its dynamic range, full sentence. Advances in digital sensors eventually matched and exceeded that performance. So that makes a full sentence as well, and therefore these two are independent classes, and we're going to try to join them. All right. So what does the sentence say? Right. It says, hey, the photographers, they long favored chemical film for its advantages. Okay. However, advances in digital sensors eventually exceeded that performance, and therefore it rendered whatever advantage that chemical film had not applicable anymore. All right. So that's what it is. So the first clause says something, and the second clause adds a contrast to that. Right. So it said, well, that was true for so long. However, it is not true anymore. All right. Okay, so let's look at the answer options. Let's pick this one and see whether this can be the right answer or we can eliminate it. Okay, so range that. So if you substitute here, long favored chemical film for its dynamic range that advances in digital sensors eventually matched and exceeded that performance. Doesn't make any sense because when you use that, that is really an affirmation or an explanation or substantiation of whatever you said, right? But whereas in this case, this is a contrast, and you don't use that in places where you need a contrast effect, right? So this cannot be the right answer. So let's look at the other ones. These are just two independent clauses now, and therefore let's apply the SPACY rule. Range without any punctuation or conjunction is incorrect because it's going to lead to a run-on. Range, comma, but. So this is a valid use of FANBOYS conjunction. And because this is a contrast situation, but makes a lot of sense, right? So photographers long favored chemical film for its dynamic range, but advances in digital sensors eventually rendered that advantage invalid or not applicable anymore. All right, so this can be the right answer. Range, comma, this would result in a comma splice, and therefore this is an incorrect answer. So get questions like this, just follow the algorithm, and you can do this like really fast and answer such questions in seconds, and you can actually answer them correctly. All right, let's go to the next question. Okay, let's look at this question. Let's look at answer options first. So just if we remove the punctuation conjunction, it's just proliferated. So I'm going to assume that this is a question about joining independent clauses. So let's go and read this question. As agriculture reached high Andean elevations, strategies for cultivating steep slopes proliferated. That's a full sentence, okay? Whereas terracing reshaped many valleys, farmers in some regions adopted raised fields and seasonal fallowing. So that is a full sentence, so that's an independent clause also. So this is a question indeed about joining independent clauses. All right. So now let's make some sense of what this whole thing is trying to say. Okay. So as agriculture reached those high elevations in the Andes mountains, and this is a mountain range in South America and Chile and the country above it, Paraguay maybe, I don't know, I don't remember. So strategies for cultivating steep slopes proliferated. So proliferated means expanded. So a lot of people were using it. Okay. So that is the statement that the first clause makes. And then here, the author is giving examples of why they think so. All right. So that is, the examples are, hey, valleys were reshaped by terrace cultivation, and farmers in some regions also adopted raised fields and seasonal fallowing. Okay, so this is a statement, and then substantiation of that statement with examples. All right, so that's the overall structure of this sentence. All right, so let's go through the options. Okay, proliferated colon. That might actually be a good answer because it's grammatically correct after the thing we are putting a colon, but for colon we need to make sure that the whole thing is semantically correct, right? I mean, it conveys the right meaning, and it does. Like you said, it makes a statement and then it gives an example. All right. Let's look at the other ones. Proliferated comma is not a good answer because it leads to a comma splice. And no, because it's an incorrect use of FANBOYS conjunction. This one is going to lead to a run-on because there's no punctuation, no conjunction, nothing. It's just putting two independent clauses together in one sentence, and it's not correct. All right. So proliferated colon is the right one. So you'll check answer. This is the right answer. So let's move to the next question. Okay. So I hope you're getting the whole thing, right? I mean, you get the drift here and how we are dealing with these questions. All right. So this one, maybe this is a hard question. Let's see. Yes. So this thing is, yeah, it's hard because of the long sentences and the sentence construct. Okay, so that's what makes a hard question in this pattern. Okay. Cahokia near present-day St. Louis flourished between 1050 and 1350 as a major urban center along the Mississippi River. Okay. Archaeologist Dana Whitlow recently surveyed the site to document its monumental earthen mounds. Constructed with alternating layers of soil and basket-loaded fill, the structures have endured for centuries. All right. So in this one, the first sentence here is actually just context. Okay, so we're not going to use that sentence at all, right? There's just there to provide you some context. In most cases, it's probably just wasting your time. All right. So let's look at this one. Archaeologist Dana recently surveyed. So this whole thing surveyed the site to document its monumental earthen mounds. That is a valid sentence and therefore an independent clause. Constructed with alternating layers of soil and basket-loaded fill, the structures have endured for centuries. Okay, so that is a valid sentence as well, and therefore an independent clause. Okay, so now this makes the whole question fairly straightforward. Well, even before reading the question, you must have seen these options and should have concluded that this is a question about connecting independent clauses, right? Because it's just the same two words joined together in different ways, all right, with conjunctions and punctuations. Okay, so now let's go and apply the SPACY rule. This one is a comma splice wrong. This one is an incorrect use of FANBOYS conjunction without a preceding comma, incorrect. This one is fine, right? You have the two sentences, you just put a full stop and separate them as two complete independent sentences. So this may be correct. Mounds constructed, this is a run-on because you are connecting two independent clauses without any conjunction or any punctuation. Incorrect. All right, next question. Okay, so we look at the answer options. Well, they look like independent clauses, and more importantly, this looks like this is about a conjunctive adverb. It uses however. Remember the conjunctive adverb rule. You have to put a semicolon, the conjunctive adverb, and a comma. Okay, so we see this option here actually, right? So this is probably the right use. Well, we need to go figure out whether this is the right answer or not. But anyway, this gives you an idea that this question is most likely going to be about connecting or joining independent clauses. All right. So let's look at this question. Early 20th century modernists often broke with conventional narration by using fragmentation and interior monologue. Okay. This is this is just the context. They were not the first to attempt such a narrative technique. They meaning modernists. Modernists were not the first to attempt such a narrative technique. Many symbolist writers of the late 19th century had also experimented with stream of consciousness techniques. Okay, so this is a valid sentence, and they were not first to attempt such a narrative technique. That is also a full sentence and therefore an independent clause. So we have two independent clauses here. Okay. Now, before we go to the options, let's just make sense of what it is trying to say. So these two sentences are saying that the modernists were not the first to attempt such a narrative. Many symbolist writers that preceded them also had experimented with such techniques. Okay, so the first sentence is making a statement, and the second one substantiates it. Hey, they were not the first to attempt. Okay, there were people before them that also experimented with such techniques. Okay, so something like a colon would be appropriate, right? Okay, now let's look at the options. Interestingly, this actually uses however. Okay, however is a contrast word, but in this, this is not really about contrast. In fact, the second clause substantiates the first clause. Okay. Now, if we go strictly by the SPACY rule, not the SPACY rule, by the rule of the conjunctive adverb to connect two independent clauses, I would go choose this because this follows the rule. Semicolon, conjunctive adverb followed by a comma. Now let's use this here. They were not the first to attempt such a narrative technique. However, many symbolist writers of the late 19th century had also experimented with stream of conscious techniques. This doesn't make any sense because the second sentence actually affirms the first one, right? It's not a contrast. So therefore, however is not the right word to use here, okay? So then why did they put it here, right? Let's go figure out why, okay? This is when this context sentence is useful. So what does this sentence say? This sentence makes a statement saying, hey, early 20th century modernists often broke with a conventional narrative technique, okay? And then the second one says, however, they were not the first to attempt such a narrative. So the first one says, the early modernists, they broke with conventional narration. And then the second sentence is actually contrasting the first one and then saying, however, they were not the first to attempt such a narrative. All right. Actually, for the conjunctive adverb, one of the things you should note is it need not just be a semicolon. It could be a full stop or a period followed by the conjunctive adverb as well. Okay. So you need to remember that. So, so the however is actually, it actually belongs to this sentence, not this one. All right. So ideally, they should have written, however, they were not the first to attempt such a narrative. Or they could also have written, they were not, comma, however, comma, the first to attempt such a narrative. That would also be valid. Okay. So, but they decided to put however after technique, like as the last word in the sentence. So the way to read the sentence is, they were not the first to attempt such a narrative technique, however. Okay. So you are really contrasting this from whatever the first statement or the first line, first sentence stated. Okay. So if we make however part of the first sentence, then the first independent clause is going to be, they were not the first to attempt such a narrative technique, however. Okay. And then the second clause is, many symbolist writers, blah, blah, blah. Right. So now when you take these two independent clauses, the only legal way to join them among these given options is the second one, which is a semicolon. Okay. So this one is a trick question. All right. And the reason we picked it up is because I came across a very, very similar question on one of the Blue Book practice tests, or it must have been in the question bank somewhere in the official practice material. Such a question was there. Okay, so therefore I picked up a number of usages like this and added to Just Logged In. So you can practice with some of these. Okay, but this is really a trick question. So putting however at the end is not a very common usage. Okay, a very clear usage would have been to put however in the front, or maybe add it as a parenthetical. After. It's not a parenthetical, but add it as a as an enhancement here. Like, they were not, however, the first attempt to attempt such a narrative. Okay, so you could have added it there. All right, so you need to practice some variations like this. This is a trick question. All right. Okay, let's move to the next one. In 2018, Dr. Kwan modified a condenser to minimize heat loss, and over the next semester, the team reduced solvent use by nearly 30%. Okay, so this is actually a pretty simple question. It's just laws, and if you just remove, it's straightforward application of SPACY. Okay, so this is incorrect because this is going to result in a comma splice. This one is an incorrect use of FANBOYS. This is going to result in a run-on, and this one is correct use of the FANBOYS conjunction in this place. Okay, so let's put it back here. Modified a condenser to minimize heat loss, and over the next semester, the team reduce solvent use. Okay. All right. So the next question. Again, if you look at these answer options, it's quite obvious that this is going to be a question about joining independent classes. Lap swimming can be adjusted for any fitness level. Okay, so this is a context sentence. It is low impact. It still challenges the cardiovascular system. Okay, so this is actually contrasting what the first statement says, which is it is low impact. Hey, it is low impact, but it still challenges the cardiovascular system. Okay, so it does indeed have but. Okay, this is a contrast, but what's the right use of it? Not this one, not this one. This is the right, this is the right use of the fanboys. Okay, and this is also incorrect use of fanboys. That's the right answer. All right, next question. Just look at this one. It's quite obvious it's going to be about joining independent classes. Let's go put this here. Before throwing a pot, artisans wedge the clay thoroughly. To skip this step risks air pockets that can cause the pot to crack during firing. Okay, both are valid independent clauses. Okay, wedge the clay thoroughly, so that's an independent clause, and to skip this step risks air pockets, blah blah blah. That's a valid independent clause as well. As to is not correct. Okay, so if you look at this, as to skip this step risks air pockets that can cause the pot to crack during firing doesn't make sense as a sentence. Okay, so I'm gonna strike this out. So given the other things, right, so this is a run-on, no punctuation between the two independent clauses. This one is valid. We make two independent sentences. So this one is a comma splice. All right, so this is invalid too. All right. Okay, this question, when we just look at the answer options, we have proliferated. Okay, we remove the punctuations and the conjunctions. So this looks like an independent clauses question. All right. So go read this. As agriculture reached high Andean elevations, strategies for cultivating steep slopes proliferated. Okay, that's a full sentence, an independent clause. Whereas terracing reshaped many valleys, farmers in some regions adopted raised fields and seasonal following. So that is another independent clause. It makes a full sentence, so a legal sentence. So therefore, it's an independent clause. All right. So we're going to look to connecting these two. All right. Okay. So let's look at what this actually means. Okay. So what they're saying is, as agriculture reached the high Andean elevation. So Andean, it's about the Andes mountains. Okay. So trivia about Andes. This is in South America, and this is actually the longest mountain range above the water. Okay. So the continental range, right? The longest continental mountain range, and it is actually longer than the Rocky Mountains and also the Appalachian or the Ural, Himalayas and all. All right. So in fact, it stretches from the north to the south of South America. Okay, so almost stretching the west coast of South America all the way from Venezuela to Chile and Argentina, all the way south. Okay, anyway, I digress, sorry. So what it's saying is, as agriculture reached these high Andean elevations, then new strategies for cultivating these steep slopes evolved, or proliferated actually. Proliferated means kind of spread widely, all right? And the second one is actually giving examples, okay? While terracing reshaped many valleys, like they had terrace cultivation in the valleys, some farmers in some regions also adopted raised fields and seasonal following, okay? So essentially what it's trying to say is the first one makes a statement about all these new strategies for cultivating the steep slopes of the Andes. And then the second one actually substantiates it. Okay, it gives some examples. Okay, so that's the context. All right. So now when we look at these options, take the first one, proliferated colon. Okay. So this is actually quite accurate. I mean, it fits in with this sentence quite well. One, it is grammatically appropriate. Like, I mean, just you can put a colon to join two clauses, but for a colon to work, it has to be semantically valid, right? So in this case, it is, because the first clause is making a statement and the second clause is actually substantiating it by giving examples. All right. So proliferated could be the right answer. Okay. Now let's look at the other ones and eliminate them. So comma is not the right answer because this is going to result in a comma splice, and is not the right answer. It's a it's an improper use of FANBOYS conjunction. You should have a comma preceding and. This is going to result in error none. All right. So, sorry, all this is incorrect. So, proliferated is the right answer. Okay, let's choose this one. All right. All right. So, let's check the answer. Okay, move to the next question. Okay, this one, something concerning electronics. Consider a basic RC low pass filter. Okay, high frequency signals encounter low reactance in the capacitor. A phasor diagram clarifies how this works. The capacitor diverts those frequencies to ground. Only the slow varying components appear at the output. Okay, so let's just look at this one. This is where the question is. A phasor diagram clarifies how this works. Okay, that's a full sentence. Okay, and there's because the capacitor diverts those frequencies to ground, only the slow varying components appear at the output. Okay, that's a valid sentence. Because the capacitor diverts to the ground, comma, something happens. All right. You cannot say it's because, right? It's because the capacitor diverts frequencies to the ground, only the slow. That's not a valid sentence. It doesn't make it. It doesn't make it one. So I can safely eliminate C and D. Okay. So the choice is between these two. Okay. A phasor diagram clarifies how this works. Because the capacitor diverts the those frequencies to ground, blah, blah, blah. So between these two, this is the only right answer because this puts a period after the first independent clause, makes it a sentence, and the second one is a valid sentence, right? This is not correct, all right? So quite easy. I believe this is a hard question. It is, but it's quite easy if you follow the rules. All right, let's look at this one. Again, if you look at this, these options just differing by punctuation or conjunction, I'm expecting to see a question about joining independent classes. All right. So on this date, the Wright brothers' flyer rose from the windswept dunes at Kill Devil Hills. Okay. Having refined their wind-warping controls through countless trials at Kitty Hawk, the brothers achieved a controlled, sustained flight that transformed aviation. So this is talking about the first flight of the Wright brothers. Yeah. Okay, so the flyer rose from the windswept dunes at Kill Devil Hills. That this whole thing makes a valid independent clause. And then having refined their wind warping controls through blah, 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 this entire thing makes a independent clause as well. All right. Therefore, this is about joining two independent classes. And let's look at these options now. And having, this is wrong, this is incorrect. Okay, so this one is a incorrect use of FANBOYS conjunction. This one leads to a comma splice. This is valid. You break them down into two sentences using a period. This is valid. This is invalid because it creates a run-on. All right, so that's it. All right, so we are done. So I picked a number of questions that are representative of what you might see on the real test. But like I said, practice is what makes you better. So therefore, go to Just Logged In and start practicing this particular topic. And as you do 10, 15 questions, you'll become pretty conversant with everything you have to do. It's pretty algorithmic, and there is no reason why you can't get or you cannot get all the questions correct on the real SAT on this particular topic. Okay, so it's fairly simple. Just make sure that after you identify the right option, substitute it in the sentence and see if everything makes sense, both from a grammar perspective as well as in terms of semantics, that is a contextual meaning that it implies. All right. So that's about it, and we'll see you in another video. All right. Thank you.